Back in my day, trans men were men and trans women were women. Now, I'm a salt of the earth kind of guy, so I don't want to hear that trans women ain't women.
The whole of modern society is based on the procession of time, historicism, the notion of history, and our place in it. Thus, it has engendered the ideas of progress and evolution. What does conservatism attempt to conserve? Only a particular period. Rather than turning to timeless principles, the domain of space, the conservative tries to hold on to the grains of an hourglass that slip through his fingers. The concept of period or historical epoch already betrays its ephemerality. Progress becomes inevitable, which wipes away the past through the necessary procession of moment after moment and generation after generation. Already in its program is its demise. Conservatism is hopeless and nostalgic romanticism. The timeless principles of reaction can hold fast against the waves of time that crash against our shore, but how can a mere period in the current of time become a principle? By chaining an idea to a generation, the idea is doomed to die with it. When the baby boomers and millennials disappear, so too will conservatism. This is only a positive development. Turning back the clock is impossible. What remains is to forge ahead as a vanguard, throw off the chains of both bourgeoisie and proletariat under the banner that has never fallen, the Rock of Ages. Conservatives unwillingly betray themselves to appear reasonable, demonstrating the limits of rationalism, which is the epistemic cornerstone of an age in its death throes. In truth, anything can be rationalized, including that which is against normality. Without a block to anchor them, they throw themselves into the sea. They will accept anything as long as it is yesterday and not today. But lo, tomorrow becomes yesterday. They can, with no measure of irony, proclaim that the acceptance of homosexuality, but not all this other more progressive nonsense, of course, is traditional, because traditionality is reduced to a decade. Conservatism helplessly transitions into progressivism just as the seconds turn into minutes. If conservatism were an effective political force, it would have worked in 1950, 1960, 1970, or 2010. Instead, it has repeatedly given way to the passage of time and to the involution of society. Can they really proclaim to hold those eternal principles dear when they are the mere unconscious and historical product of a contemporary bourgeois mentality and the legacy of Calvinism, which has instituted cupidity as a form of religion? What even are those, quote, eternal principles? They are typically those of the revolution: freedom, liberation or liberty, individualism, and democracy, all stepping stones to a world deprived of values. Those who were the safeguards of traditional principles were always those who distinguished themselves from the lower, more materialistic types by the presence of something greater than the desire to make a living. The sum of nobility is the adherence to a principle that is above and inside of oneself. To make a living is outside of and below a person. It is a pure accident. To make a principle out of the proletarian fixation of labor or the bourgeois ideal of the good life is to implicitly acquiesce to the profane demands of the modern and postmodern world. To be upwardly mobile, to become a homeowner, all of this requires that one gets with the times, trading principles for the doctrine of immediacy and the demon of necessity. In this sense, one who is without commitments to the world can be a purer conservative than any real conservative. That some sorry and wealthy souls, typically very old, continue to hold outdated social values is simply a temporary aberration that will disappear with the passage of generations. The correlation of conservative values with capitalistic industriousness will go away, giving rise to the progressive neo-capitalist of the future. To couple conservative values with capitalism and its value-free, quote-unquote, objectivity was always a deadly mistake. Increasingly, I find myself having more common ground with communists. This is not an indictment of tradition nor approval of communism, but rather an indictment of the insufficiency of conservatism, which has failed to recognize its internal antipathies and contradictions. Those who are positioned in such a way as to be critical of conservatism are often more lucid toward it than those caught under its spell. Capitalism, and therefore its bedfellow conservatism, has actually traded conservation for a life of increase, progress, and proliferation. It has turned the family from a principle into a quantity, a work unit. The father is no longer an image of God's paternity, but merely a provider, as if God could be reduced to providence alone. Labor is opposed to the good. Idle hands are the devil's workshop was always a lie. Labor, by exhausting the soul, causes the preeminence of the body. It causes privation and suffering. How many conservatives unwind after work by resorting to alcohol? How much has the world been raped by technological progress, driven by human labor for its own sake? No. Busy hands are the devil's workshop. So, the conservative does not value the principle of the family. He does not value the soul. All he values is the cold impersonality of the industrial society and the mere appearance that existed at a moment in time. He mistakes lead for gold and increasingly uranium for lead. Often today, conservatism even takes the form of capitalist materialism. The number of people who are fiscally conservative but socially liberal is increasing. In fact, this is the view typical of liberalism as a whole. Conservatives are not very distinct from their enemies, and so often, their ability to distinguish between friend and foe is neutered. This is why they call communists Nazis and Nazis communists. Anything that calls into question their sacred cow, capitalism, is an enemy. They have so thoroughly wedded themselves to a product of time and therefore of progress that they have given up on conserving traditional principles. It's as if the latter were only an accidental fashion accessory or an aesthetic.